What does a child do with a love that has nowhere to go? If you have ever sent a letter that was never answered, or if you have ever been the one who should have written and never did, this story will find you somewhere deep and quiet, in the place where you keep the things you never say out loud. By the end of this story, you will understand why a father held on to a photograph for nearly 50 years without ever once picking up the phone, and why his son, now a grown man with children of his own, never stopped believing that the silence was somehow his fault. His name was Marcus. He was 12 years old, the first time he understood that his father was not coming back. Not because anyone told him, no one told him anything. That was the particular cruelty of it. The silence that surrounded his father's absence was as complete and as carefully maintained as the silence in a room where someone has just died and nobody knows what to say yet. The adults around him moved carefully, spoke in low tones when they thought he was not listening, and changed the subject whenever the conversation drifted too close to the word father in a sentence that applied to him. He had been 2 years old when his father left. 2 years old, which means he had no memory of the man, not a voice, not a smell, not the sensation of being held. All he had was a photograph that his mother kept in a drawer in the kitchen beneath a folded dish towel, as if she had decided to hide it but could not bring herself to throw it away. In the photograph, a woman held a small child against her hip. The child wore a white shirt and squinted into the sun. A man stood slightly behind them, one hand raised toward the camera, in a gesture that was either a wave or a farewell. It was impossible to tell which, and Marcus spent a long time as a boy trying to decide. The man in the photograph had been his father. His name was Henry. He had come from far away, and history and the kinds of old decisions that ripple forward for generations, without anyone asking the people most affected whether they agreed. He had arrived in the south of his divided country as a young man, found work, found a community, found a woman he loved. He had stayed for several years. He had been a father for exactly 2 of them. Then the war ended in the way wars sometimes end, not with a clean victory, but with a reshuffling, a drawing of new lines, a sudden movement of people back toward the places they had come from, whether they wanted to go or not. Henry had gone north. He had left behind a wife who was not his legal wife. He had left behind a son who was not yet old enough to remember him. He had not written. He had not called. For nearly 10 years, he had not sent a single word. Marcus grew up in a small house at the edge of a provincial town, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and a child without a father was a fact that got noted, filed away, and occasionally brought out in moments of casual cruelty by other children on the school grounds. He was a quiet boy. He read books. He helped his mother with the vegetable garden. He learned not to flinch when someone asked about his father, not because the question stopped hurting, but because he had decided very early that he would not let anyone see it hurt. His mother's name was Lynn. She was a school teacher, a woman of considerable dignity and very limited resources, who had raised her son alone in a country that was still figuring out what it was going to be. After years of conflict, she was warm but not demonstrative. She taught Marcus to read before he started school, taught him that self-reliance was a form of love, taught him by example that a person could survive almost anything if they maintained their posture and their sense of humor and their refusal to complain in public. What she did not teach him was anything about his father. That subject was locked away behind a door she had decided, for reasons she never fully explained, to keep closed. So Marcus constructed his father from absence. He imagined a man who was busy, a man who was far away and could not easily communicate, a man who thought about his son in the north, who looked out windows in the early morning and wondered how the boy was growing. He held onto these imaginings with the particular fierce tenderness that children apply to things they are not sure are true. He believed in them the way a child believes in things that are necessary to believe in, not quite fully, not quite not. When Marcus was 9, he asked his mother directly. They were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, the light going golden outside the window, the evening sounds of the neighborhood drifting in through the screen door. He had been building up to the question for days. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said in the measured voice she used when she was trying not to let her feelings into the room, that his father had gone back to his family in the north, that he had responsibilities there, that life was complicated in ways that were difficult to explain to a 9-year-old, that Marcus should not think badly of anyone. Then she cleared the dishes. He lay awake that night for a very long time, staring at the ceiling in the dark, trying to understand the architecture of what she had said. His father had gone back to his family, which meant that his father had another family, which meant that Marcus had not been the only child, the only son. He had been one of several obligations, and when the accounting was done, he had been the one left off the balance sheet. He was 9 years old. He did not have the vocabulary for what he felt, but he felt it in his body, a kind of interior collapse, the sensation of something that had been quietly holding itself together, finally letting go. He did not cry. He had made that decision at 9 not to cry about this particular thing. By the time Marcus was 12, he had done something that neither his mother nor anyone else had suggested or encouraged. He had decided to write a letter. It was a Tuesday evening in mid-May. He knew the date because he wrote it at the top of the page in his careful schoolboy handwriting, the way his teacher had taught him. He had stayed up late to write it, hunched over his desk by the light of a small lamp, listening to the house settle into quiet around him. He wrote to his father the way you write to someone you love and have never met, with a kind of desperate formality that is really just tenderness trying to make itself presentable. He told his father that he was 12 years old and in the 6th grade. He told his father that he studied hard. He said that he did not blame him, and then crossed that out, and then rewrote it, because it was true even though it also wasn't entirely true. He wrote that he missed him, even though he wasn't sure that was the right word for longing for someone you had never known. He asked whether his father thought about him. He asked whether his father remembered the photograph. Near the end of the letter, he wrote something that must have cost him a great deal to put into words on a page. He wrote that a drop of blood is thicker than a bucket of water, an old saying from the place where he lived, a saying about the indestructibility of family ties, and he asked his father whether, between the two of them, what flowed was blood or water. He folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope. He addressed it to the town where he believed his father lived, based on fragments of overheard conversation over the years. He mailed it from the post office on his way to school. He waited. He waited through May and into June. He waited through the long, hot summer, checking the mail with a casualness he did not feel. He waited into September, into the new school year, into October. He made himself stop checking the mail every day. He made himself stop thinking about it. No answer came. He was 12 years old, and the silence that came back from that letter was a different kind of silence than the silence that had come before it. Before, the silence had been simply an absence, a gap where something should have been. After the letter, the silence was a response. It was information. It told him something specific about where he stood. Marcus grew up. He finished school. He got a job. He married a woman he loved very much, a kind and practical woman who made him laugh and who understood, without needing it explained, that there were rooms in her husband that he did not invite people into. They had children. He became a father himself, which was the strangest experience of his life. The discovery that fatherhood was not a complicated philosophical position, but a simple, daily, overwhelming fact. He was there every morning. He was there every evening. He was there in the middle of the night when someone had a bad dream. He did not think about his own father very often. Or rather, he thought about him the way you think about a door that is always locked. Not obsessively, not constantly, but in the occasional unguarded moment, your hand reaches for the handle. He had stopped trying to understand the silence. He had filed it in the cabinet, marked things that happened and cannot be changed. And he had gone on with his life, because going on with your life is the only reasonable response to most of the things that happen to you. And then, one afternoon in the middle of an ordinary week, his phone rang. The person on the other end of the line was a stranger, a young man with a friendly voice, someone who ran a community connection program, who helped people find family members they had lost touch with across the divided country. He spoke carefully and warmly. He said that he had been contacted by a family in the north. He said the family was looking for someone. He said the name. Marcus stood very still in the middle of his kitchen. He said, "Yes, that is my name." The young man said that someone had seen a video, that a half-brother had been searching, that a father, now very old, very frail, living in the family home in the north, had been asked whether he wanted to make contact. Marcus held the phone against his ear and looked out his kitchen window at the yard. At the tree his children had climbed 1,000 times. At the ordinary afternoon light falling across the grass, he said, "What did he say?" When they asked him if he wanted to make contact, what did he say? The young man paused. Then he said yes. Marcus did not say anything for a moment. And then the young man told him something that changed the shape of the last 48 years in a single sentence. Something that had been kept in a room, in a house in the north for all this time. Something that meant the silence had never meant what Marcus had spent a lifetime believing it meant. The young man's name was Daniel. He was Henry's youngest son, the youngest of 6 children born to Henry and his wife in the north, and the one who had, by some combination of personality and circumstance, become the keeper of the family's interior life. He was the one who drove his father to doctor's appointments and sat with him in waiting rooms and asked the nurses questions in the careful, thorough way of someone who has decided that paying attention is a form of love. He was the one who checked in on his father every few days, who noticed when the old man's appetite changed, who could tell from the way his father held his shoulders whether he was in pain. He was also the one who had walked into his mother's room after she passed. His mother had been gone for 2 years by then. Her room had been left largely undisturbed, not out of any formal decision, but out of the organic reluctance that settles over a family after a loss. The way nobody wants to be the first one to move the dead person's things, because moving them feels like agreeing to something irreversible. The room still smelled faintly of her. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. Daniel had gone in one evening in late autumn to begin the slow process of sorting through her belongings. He had worked methodically, the way he did most things, folding clothes into piles, setting aside items that other family members might want. He opened the drawer of her writing desk. Inside the drawer, beneath a stack of old letters and a small prayer book and a folded piece of cloth, he found a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed a young woman holding a small child. The child wore a white shirt. A man stood slightly behind them, his hand raised toward the camera. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting, Daniel recognized as his father's were 3 lines: a woman's name, a child's name, a date. Nothing else. He sat down on the edge of his mother's bed and read the letter. It was written in a child's handwriting, careful, formal, slightly uneven in the way that handwriting is when a person is concentrating very hard on making each letter correct. It was addressed to a father. It asked questions that a 12-year-old child should not have to ask. It invoked the old saying about blood and water. It was dated decades ago. Daniel sat in his mother's room for a long time after he finished reading. He understood several things at once, in the way you sometimes understand a complicated situation all at once rather than piece by piece. He understood that his father had not been entirely honest about his past. He understood that somewhere in the South there was a man, a half-brother he had never met, who had written this letter as a child and received no response. He understood that his mother had intercepted the letter and kept it. He understood that she had kept it for nearly 45 years without telling anyone. He sat with these understandings for a long time. He turned them over. He examined them from different angles. His mother had been a proud woman. She had been fiercely protective of her family, protective of her husband's position, protective of the life they had built together. His father had been a man of some standing in their community, a bank official, a person people came to for guidance and advice. His mother had spent decades maintaining the architecture of their reputation. Daniel understood this. He did not excuse it, exactly, but he understood it, in the complicated way that you understand the things people you love have done that you wish they hadn't. What he felt more strongly than anger was grief. Not for himself, but for the 12-year-old boy who had sat down at a desk late at night and written that letter with such careful, formal hope, and then waited through a summer and an autumn for an answer that was sitting in a drawer in a house in the north. Read once, and then folded away into silence. He thought about that boy for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. He did not call his father first. He was not sure his father was strong enough for what would need to be said, or clear enough. Henry was nearly 90 now, his eyesight almost entirely gone, his memory unreliable in the way that extreme old age sometimes makes memory unreliable. Certain rooms of the past suddenly accessible, while others sealed themselves off without warning. He still knew his children. He still knew music. He still knew the feel of sunlight on his face in the morning. But Daniel knew that if he was going to do this, and he had already decided that he was going to do this, he needed to talk to someone in the South first. He needed to find the boy from the letter. He searched online. He posted carefully worded inquiries in community groups. He found a program run by a young man who specialized in exactly this kind of search in reconnecting people, separated by the old divisions, by history, by the choices adults made when they were young, and the consequences that radiated forward through decades like light, from a source that no longer existed. He shared the photograph. He shared the name written on the back, and within 10 days the young man called him back. There had been a connection in the South. A woman, an aunt, the sister of the boy's mother, a woman now in her 70s, who had seen the program's posting and recognized the photograph and the name, who had spent a sleepless night deciding whether to reach out, who had finally sent a message at 6 in the morning because she had not been able to eat breakfast without feeling that she was doing something wrong by staying silent. Her name was Clara. She was warm and direct in equal measure, the kind of woman who had arrived at late life with a clear sense of what mattered and very little patience for pretense. She had known Marcus's mother. While they had been sisters, close sisters, the kind who shared everything, had known about the relationship, had been one of the few adults in Marcus's childhood who had understood what the silence was costing the boy without having any power to change it. She had kept in her own drawer, all these years, the photograph that Henry had sent south with his address on the back, the same photograph, from the other direction. When the connection program brought them all together, Clara in the South, Daniel in the North, the program coordinator bridging the distance, the call was warm and careful and quietly emotional, in the way that conversations are when the people involved have been carrying something heavy for a long time and are only now, slowly, beginning to set it down. Clara spoke about Marcus. She told Daniel what kind of man his half-brother had become, his steadiness, his decency, his family, the way he had gone through life without bitterness, even though bitterness would have been entirely justified. She told him about the boy Marcus had been, about the letter, about the long summer of waiting. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want him to know that our father kept the photograph, that he kept it all these years, that it was in his things, not hidden, not put away, kept where he could find it. I want Marcus to know that." Clara pressed her hand against her mouth on the other side of the call, and then Daniel said, "I also need to tell you something about our father's health, because Marcus needs to know this before anything else is decided, because there may not be as much time as we would like there to be." He paused. The photograph had been in Henry's drawer. Yes, not his wife's drawer, his own. He had kept it separately, privately, for all these years. He had been asked, a week ago, whether he wanted to see his son from the South, and he had said yes clearly, without hesitation, in a voice steadier than most of the words he managed these days. But Henry had not left his bed in 3 months. Marcus did not sleep the night before he traveled north. He lay in the dark beside his wife and listened to the house, breathe around him the settling of walls, the distant sound of a car passing on the road outside, the faint rhythm of his wife's breathing beside him. She had held his hand at dinner without saying anything, which was her way of saying everything that needed to be said. She knew what this was. She understood in the way that people who love someone for a long time come to understand the shape of the unspoken things. That this journey was not only about a father, it was about a boy who had once sat up late with a lamp and a piece of paper and had staked something tender and irreplaceable on the chance that love, if offered clearly enough, would be returned. He had not told his children exactly where he was going. He had told them he was making a trip north. His oldest daughter, who was 18 and noticed everything, had looked at him across the dinner table and said quietly, "Is everything okay?" And he had said yes, everything is okay, and had believed it, mostly. He was 58 years old. He had lived his whole life in the South, in the town where his mother had raised him, in the house she had left him when she died. He had built a good life there, a solid, warm, unremarkable life of the kind that looks from the outside like nothing in particular, and is, from the inside, everything. He had not expected, at 58, to feel like a child again. But lying in the dark the night before the journey, he felt it, the specific, physical vulnerability of a person moving towards something they have wanted for a very long time, without letting themselves admit how much they wanted it. He thought about the letter he had written at 12. He had not thought about it consciously in years, had packed it away in the same interior cabinet, where he kept everything that had no resolution. But it came back to him now with a clarity that surprised him. He remembered the lamp. He remembered the careful handwriting. He remembered sealing the envelope and holding it for a moment before letting it go. He thought about Daniel. They had spoken twice now on the phone, and something strange and precise had happened in those conversations, a kind of recognition that had no logical basis, since they were strangers, since they had different mothers and had grown up in different worlds. And yet, the way Daniel spoke, careful and direct, with a warmth beneath the precision, reminded Marcus of something he could not name, some quality that felt familiar in the way a melody is familiar before you can place it. He thought about a photograph of himself at 2 years old, held on his mother's hip, squinting into the sun. A man standing slightly behind them, hand raised. He had looked at that photograph so many times that he no longer saw it clearly. It had become a kind of mental furniture, always present, never quite examined. He had learned, in the days since Daniel's call, that his father had kept a copy of the same photograph, not hidden, not put away in someone else's drawer, kept in his own space, in his own things, for all the decades of silence. Marcus did not know what to do with this information exactly. He turned it over the way you turn over a stone that looks ordinary and reveals something unexpected underneath. He had spent most of his life reading the silence as indifference. He was now being asked to consider that the silence might have meant something else entirely, might have been someone else's silence, imposed on a man who had his own reasons for it that Marcus had never had access to. He was not sure he could hold both things at once, the damage and the explanation. He was not sure he was supposed to. He lay in the dark and let them sit beside each other without resolving them. His wife stirred. She reached for his hand in the dark without opening her eyes, and held it. He lay still. At some point he slept. The flight north took less than 2 hours. Daniel met him at the airport, a man in his mid-40s, solidly built, with a face that Marcus had not expected to find so immediately legible. They shook hands, and then, after a brief pause, embraced in the automatic, slightly surprised way of people who have not yet established how close they are, but whose bodies seem to have decided without consulting anyone. They drove through the city and then out into smaller roads, past fields and tree lines and the occasional cluster of houses. Daniel talked easily in the car about his children, about the village, about the house where he had grown up. He spoke about their father with a specific, practiced tenderness, the kind that has been developed over years of managing the gap between what you wished someone was and what they actually were. He said, "He has good days and harder days," he said. "He knows you are coming. He has known for 3 days," he said. "He has not asked for much, but he asked for this." They pulled up in front of a house at the end of a lane. It was a modest house, old, well-tended. The garden kept carefully by someone who paid attention. Daniel opened the front door and held it. Marcus stepped inside. The house smelled of old wood and something herbal, something warm. It was quiet in the way that houses become quiet when the person at their center has become still. A woman came from the back of the house, one of Daniel's sisters, who greeted Marcus simply and warmly, without ceremony, and then stepped back. Daniel said, "I will take you to him." The room was small and filled with light from a window that faced the garden. There was a bed near the window, and in the bed, arranged against pillows, was a very old man. His hair was white and sparse. His hands lay on the coverlet, the knuckles enlarged with age, the skin so thin it was nearly translucent. His eyes were open, though unfocused, the eyes of someone whose sight had gone to almost nothing, and he was turned slightly toward the door, as if he had been listening for it. Daniel said, in a low voice, "Bo, he is here." The old man's face changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was not the change of a face in a film, the sudden transformation, the tears rushing in. It was quieter than that. It was a kind of settling, as if something that had been held at a slight tension for a very long time simply let go. His lips moved. He said something in a voice so quiet that Marcus, standing in the doorway, could not make out the words. Marcus crossed the room. He sat down in the chair beside the bed. He did not know what he was going to say. He had prepared things to say, on the plane, in the car, lying awake in the dark the night before, and none of them came to him now. They had all been the wrong kind of thing, anyway, explanations, grievances, questions. The room did not seem to have space for any of those. The old man turned his face toward the source of Marcus's presence and raised one hand from the coverlet. Marcus took it. The hand was very light. It was the hand of a man who had worked all his life, the skin rough beneath the thinness, the grip still present, even though it was a gentle grip now, the grip of someone who had very little strength left and was using it with complete intention. They sat like that for a while. Outside the window, the garden was green and still in the afternoon light. A bird moved somewhere in the bushes. The light shifted almost imperceptibly, the way light shifts in late afternoon, beginning its long, slow lean toward evening. The old man spoke again. This time Marcus could hear him. He said, "I kept your photograph." Marcus did not say anything. He held the old man's hand and looked at the window and the garden. Beyond it, he said, "I know." After a while, Daniel came quietly into the room with 2 cups of tea and set them on the small table and left again without a word. The tea steamed in the afternoon quiet. Marcus looked at his father's face, the face of a very old man, a stranger, a person he had spent 48 years, trying not to think about too carefully. He looked for himself in that face, the way you look for yourself in a mirror that is slightly off, trying to find the angle at which recognition happens. He found it in the line of the jaw, in the particular way the eyes sat slightly deep in the face. In something about the stillness, the quality of patience in the stillness, which Marcus recognized, because he had always believed he had learned it himself, from discipline, from necessity, and now wondered whether he had simply been born with it, whether it had traveled across the silence all those years and arrived in him without announcement. He thought about a boy at a desk with a lamp. He thought about an envelope dropped into a mail slot. He thought about all the years of not knowing, all the years of reading absence as rejection. He thought about a photograph kept in a drawer, not hidden, not put away. He thought, "This is not the story I had. This is a different story. I do not know yet whether it is a better one." But he held the old man's hand, and the old man held his, and the afternoon light continued its patient work on the garden outside the window, and after a long time, after the tea went cool on the table, and the bird moved on and the light changed again, Marcus said something very quietly, almost to himself, almost to the room, that he had waited 48 years to say. He said it without drama, without ceremony, in the same ordinary voice he used for everything. He said, "I am here now." The old man's grip tightened, very slightly for just a moment, and then it eased again, and the room was quiet, and the garden held the last of the afternoon light, like something cupped in 2 hands. A week later, Marcus sat at his own kitchen table at home. In the same chair he sat in every morning, with his coffee and his newspaper, and the ordinary sounds of his household moving around him. His daughter came through, kissed the top of his head without breaking stride, grabbed an apple from the bowl, His wife refilled her cup and stopped behind him for a moment and put her hand briefly on his shoulder before she went on. He sat for a while after they left. He thought about a drawer in a house in the north. He thought about a photograph with handwriting on the back, a name, a child's name, a date. He thought about all the things that get kept in drawers and all the things that don't, and about the difference between the two. He thought about his 12-year-old self, hunched over a desk by lamplight, writing in careful formal sentences about blood and water. He reached across the table and picked up his phone. He looked at it for a moment. Then he scrolled to his daughter's name and pressed call. She answered on the second ring, surprised. A little breathless from whatever she was in the middle of, he said, "Nothing is wrong. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a small silence. Then she laughed softly, the specific laugh of a person who is moved and doesn't quite know how to say so. She said, "Hi, Dad," he said. Hi. They talked for a while about nothing in particular, about her plans for the week, about a book she was reading, about whether it was going to rain. The ordinary small commerce of two people who love each other and talk regularly and therefore have no urgent need to say the big things, because the big things are already understood. When they hung up, Marcus set the phone back on the table and sat with his coffee in the morning light. He did not think about what he had lost. He thought, instead, about what a person carries forward and what they choose to put down. Is there someone you have been meaning to call? Maybe today is the day.